You're watching a Highwire Media podcast.
Hello, and welcome back to our first episode of Crime and Coffee, your morning dose of all the latest crime headlines, delivered to you every Tuesday morning. Of course, before we do that, don't forget to hit that subscribe button down below, hit the bell notification button to be notified of future videos. And of course, with that, let's dive into our first topic. So here's what we know so far about the deadly attack in New Orleans. A truck plowed into a crowd on New Orleans' famed Bourbon Street in the early hours of New Year's Day, leaving at least 15 people dead and dozens more hospitalized with injuries. Apologies if I butcher his name wrong, but I don't really actually care since he's responsible. But the driver was identified as Shamsuddin Jabbar, a 42-year-old Army veteran from Houston, Texas. He was killed in a gunfire exchange with police following the attack, which is being investigated as terrorism. An Islamic State flag was visibly attached to the pickup truck, but agency officials have yet to indicate a motive. The FBI said it's likely the driver did not act alone, and is searching for information that could lead to additional suspects who may have aided in the attack. Weapons and what appeared to be an IED were found inside the truck, according to the federal agency. Investigators found and neutralized other IEDs in the French Quarter. Authorities said they swept the French Quarter, parts of the Central Business District, and the Caesar Superdome, where the now-delayed Sugar Bowl was held, looking for additional IEDs. Nightly, crowds packed Bourbon Street, a 13-block stretch in the city's French Quarter, where patrons of the street's bars, restaurants, and music venues often spill into the road, which is usually blocked to cars. The number of visitors to New Orleans this week swelled as revelers flocked to the popular destination for New Year's Eve celebrations and ahead of the Sugar Bowl. So here's what else we know so far. It was an intentional attack on one of New Orleans' busiest nights, according to officials. Around 3:15 a.m. on Wednesday, the suspect veered around a police vehicle blocking the intersection of Canal and Bourbon Streets, speeding onto the sidewalk before steering back onto Bourbon, according to police. The driver continued for almost 3 blocks down Bourbon Street, crossing, Iberville and Bienville Street, and then crashing just before Conti Street. After crashing, the driver exited the pickup and fired at police officers, injuring 2. The injured officers are in stable condition, according to police. The dozens of others who were injured were taken to nearby hospitals, with some in critical condition. The suspect drove down Bourbon Street at a very fast pace and tried to run over as many people as possible. Entry to Bourbon Street is usually blocked off to vehicle traffic by metal bollards, pole-like barricades, but those were down for maintenance at the time of the attack, with the repair near completion, said New Orleans mayor. The police car that the suspect bypassed was serving as a makeshift roadblock for vehicles trying to enter the French Quarter's busiest street. In remarks from Camp David, President Biden called it a heinous attack. Law enforcement officials are also looking into whether the incident is connected to a Tesla Cybertruck that exploded outside President-elect Donald Trump's Las Vegas hotel. President Biden said 1 person died and 7 others were injured in the explosion. Alethea Duncan, FBI assistant special agent in charge of the investigation, said they did not believe the suspect was solely responsible. He called on members of the public who may have had interactions with the suspect in the last 72 hours to come forward. Jabbar rented a white Ford truck on December 30th and was seen driving it in Houston before heading to New Orleans, said Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. Duncan said authorities are looking into whether Jabbar had ties to any terrorist organizations. The Islamic State terrorist group has not claimed responsibility for the attack. In his remarks, Biden said that hours before the attack, Jabbar posted videos to social media indicating that he was inspired by ISIS. But the president added that the investigation is a fluid situation and no one should jump to conclusions. Jabbar was a U.S. citizen and was honorably discharged from the Army, the FBI said. An Army spokesman confirmed that Jabbar served as a human resource specialist and information technology specialist from March 2007 until January 2015, and then in the Army Reserve as an IT specialist until July 2020. February 2009, he deployed to Afghanistan, where he served for about 11 months. He left the service with the rank of Staff Sergeant. Police were at Jabbar's home in northwest Houston and said it was an active investigation scene. The house is cut off from the street by a large iron gate with ducks and sheep seen roaming the property, according to Houston Public Media's Rob Salinas. The Texas newsroom reported that a neighbor who didn't know Jabbar by name described the suspect as quiet and their interactions as normal. A review of the Texas Secretary of State records by the Texas newsroom found that Jabbar had started a handful of realty businesses in Texas. 2 of them were defunct in recent years. In a now removed YouTube video for one of the businesses posted 4 years ago, Jabbar says he was born and raised in Beaumont, Texas, and spent all his life in the state, except for his time in the military. He said his 10 years in the military is where I learned the meaning of great service and what it means to be responsive and take everything seriously, dotting the I's and crossing T's to make sure that things go off without a hitch. Georgia State University spokesperson confirmed Jabbar attended the school from 2015 to 2017 and graduated with a business administration bachelor's degree in computer information systems. In a statement emailed to NPR by Deloitte Managing Director Jonathan Gandel, the company acknowledged Jabbar had been employed at the consulting firm, but did not elaborate on his duties or how long he worked there. In response to the attack, Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry has declared a state of emergency in New Orleans and called up 100 members of a military police unit of the Louisiana National Guard to assist with security. The order, which frees up additional state and federal resources to support security, comes ahead of the city's plans to host an influx of visitors for multiple high-profile events, including the Sugar Bowl, which has come and gone, and of course, Mardi Gras season, which starts very soon, and of course, the Super Bowl on February 9th. And now on to our next topic. What we know about the driver who exploded a Cybertruck in Las Vegas. Law enforcement officials gave some insight Friday on why a 5-time Bronze Star recipient and new father would orchestrate a suicidal New Year's Day explosion, saying he wrote of political grievances, armed conflicts elsewhere, as well as domestic issues in the days leading up to the blast in Las Vegas. 1 of 2 letters shared by police show Matthew Livelsberger of Colorado said the incident was intended not as a terrorist attack, but rather a wake-up call, saying Americans only pay attention to spectacle and violence, and fireworks and explosives were best to get his point across. The second letter that police believe he wrote called for action to remove Democrats from both the federal government and the military. That letter also included the possibility of occupying roads and federal buildings, not ruling out the use of force. The writings, the first letter containing more than 400 words and the second containing fewer than 125, were found in the bomber's cell phone, as well as a 10-day journal of activity or surveillance log from December 21st to December 31st, which chronicled his purchase of firearms, camping equipment, and other items. An ex-girlfriend, Alicia Artist, who dated the man from 2018 to 2019 and from 2020 to about 2022, told CNN that he had been depressed while they were together. He suffered concussions, but it's not clear how many, and also had back surgeries in 2018 and 2019, relating to injuries he suffered during his military service. The AP reported that Livelsberger spoke of injuries, pain, and exhaustion in text to his ex-girlfriend while they were dating at one point, writing, "My life has been a personal hell for the last year. It's refreshing to have such a nice person come along." U.S. officials familiar with Livelsberger's military records told CNN he had been diagnosed with depression last year, but had not been assessed to be a risk of violence or suicide. An active duty U.S. Army Green Beret, Livelsberger was on leave from his base in Germany at the time of the blast. A combination of fireworks, gas tanks, and camping fuel in the bed of the vehicle detonated by a device controlled by the driver. According to law enforcement, he shot and killed himself in the driver's seat shortly before the explosive in the trunk of the Tesla detonated. Livelsberger's body was so badly burned, authorities identified him through charred identification records and partial tattoos visible on his body. Law enforcement officials confirmed Friday it was Livelsberger's body. Investigators fanned out after the incident, interviewing his family and friends and digging into photos and computers for clues. Livelsberger's social media presence was sparse, and at the time of the explosion, contained few, if any, references to politics. A family member and former Army colleague described him as a highly decorated combat vet whose background in special forces and explosives seemed at odds with a blast which relied in part on fireworks. And they said Livelsberger had a strong love of country, particularly the president-elect. Livelsberger was not affiliated with a political party, according to the Colorado Secretary of State voter registration database. In the first letter released Friday by police, he wrote before the incident he needed to cleanse his mind of the brothers I've lost and relieve himself of the burden of the lives I took. Spencer Evans, the special agent in charge of the FBI's Las Vegas division, said the incident appeared to be a tragic case of suicide involving a heavily decorated combat veteran who was struggling with PTSD and other issues. Evans said, quote, other family issues or personal grievances in his own life may have been contributing factors in the man's actions in Las Vegas. It's evident that the subject considered, planned, and thoughtfully prepared for this act alone, he added. The first of Livelsberger's letters shared by police show he supported President-elect Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and thought the country was terminally ill and headed towards collapse. The day before the blast, Livelsberger appeared to have sent an email to some online media outlets saying he was in possession of a massive VBIED, or Vehicle-Borne Improvised Explosive Device, and was armed, according to a copy reviewed by CNN. Law enforcement has reviewed the message and examined where the email originated and believe it was written by Livelsberger. The email expressed conspiratorial concerns about government agencies tracking him and suggested he had planned to travel the U.S.-Mexico border. The writing, CNN reviewed, did not make any reference to the president-elect, our hotel in Las Vegas, or Tesla. The Las Vegas explosion bore some striking similarities to a deadly attack in New Orleans earlier in the same day, when a driver with a U.S. military background plowed a rented pickup truck into a crowded celebrating New Year's on Bourbon Street, killing 14 people. Both perpetrators used a company called Turo to rent their vehicles. And both men served in Afghanistan in 2009, though there are no indications they served in the same unit or province. Law enforcement analysts assessed there is no connection between the incidents in Las Vegas and New Orleans, a law enforcement source told CNN. A fellow member of the Green Berets who served with Livelsberger in Afghanistan said a key focus of their mission was to dismantle a network of Taliban-aligned forces who had been detonating car bombs in and around Kabul in an effort to destabilize the government. The former colleague, who asked not to be identified, said their unit was often tasked with keeping a crucial highway clear of IEDs. A fellow soldier who had kept in touch with Livelsberger since their deployment said he didn't know whether the explosion of the Cybertruck was in any way inspired by the kind of attacks so common a feature of the unit's mission. The military colleague said he was shocked by the incident in Las Vegas, especially given Livelsberger's impressive credentials. Green Beret with a background in communications, IT, and tactical unmanned aerial vehicles. He also steadily advanced his rank in the military to team sergeant, the second in command to the captain in the Special Forces Detachment, a position he held until recently. Livelsberger was an Army Special Forces Operations Master Sergeant, a senior enlisted rank, according to 4 U.S. officials. He was on active duty in Germany with the 10th Special Forces Group, but was on leave at the time of the incident. Livelsberger's relative, who said he hadn't spoken with him in at least a decade but saw updates of his life through Facebook posts, remembered him as an intelligent and popular student in high school. His former military colleague told CNN he'd stay in occasional touch with Livelsberger since the end of their deployment and even sent a gift when he became a father in April last year. Livelsberger's second wife, who he married in 2022, sent the colleague a thank you letter, he said, and she has remained silent and did not respond to requests for comment from CNN or other news outlets. The fellow soldier said his friend had never indicated he was struggling, either during their deployment, where they experienced combat, or afterward. And now on to probably one of the biggest stories of the week is what's really going on with Scott Peterson's trial, or I should say potential trial. The more I hear about this case, the more I can't help but think Scott Peterson might actually have a shot at a retrial, which honestly blows my mind. I mean, what? How are we even here? I'll try to lay out the case on his behalf, and let's see where this takes us. So here's where things stand. Scott Peterson has been granted access to a whole new treasure trove of discovery. I mean, this evidence he claims he was entitled to all along, but was denied. My understanding is that the judge previously shut this down hard, like, nope, you're not getting this, go back to prison, goodbye. But now he's getting his hands on this evidence. And what's it supposedly about? This alternative theory, the one that says Scott didn't kill Lacey or their unborn son. Instead, it paints this bizarre picture of what went down the day Lacey disappeared. According to this theory, she either witnessed or tried to stop a burglary that happened across the street from their home. Scott claims he believes Lacey tried to intervene, or maybe she just saw something she wasn't supposed to. Either way, the burglars allegedly abducted her, killed her, and then, get this, drove around with her body for a while. At some point, when the police started focusing on Scott, mentioned the marina, the burglars thought, oh, perfect, let's dump her body over there and frame him. It's wild, but here we are with a judge reopening discovery so that Scott can dig into this theory more deeply. And that's where we're at. It's pretty absurd, completely absurd. Look, don't you just love when a 7.5 month pregnant woman decides to play superhero and stop burglaries, and then apparently these burglars who were just there to steal think, hey, you know what would be fun? Drive around for a few days with a dead body in the car, because that makes sense, right? And then because they're apparently criminal masterminds, they decided to dump the body in the exact same marina where Scott Peterson was fishing. Not a different marina, not some obscure place. Nope, the exact one that's been all over the news. Because that's what burglars do. Yeah, it totally happens all the time. And not to completely obliterate the argument here, but let's take this one step further. These burglars were really trying to frame Scott. Why on earth would they weigh the body down with homemade cement anchors? Think about it. If you're framing someone, wouldn't you just dump the body somewhere it can be found? Maybe toss it overboard so it floats back in? I know, apparently we're supposed to believe that these burglars routinely make fake anchors out of cement. I mean, that's just basic burglary 101, right? Look, this whole case is part of a trend we're seeing lately. Decades go by and people forget the facts. Suddenly, all this overwhelming evidence gets overshadowed by flashy new headlines, and before you know it, we're talking about Scott Peterson as if he's some victim of the system. But let me be very clear. This was a domestic violence murder. I don't even have to say alleged because the man was convicted. And people also seem to forget all the surrounding evidence. Like, do we really have to remind everyone about Amber Frey? Apparently we do. People forget the affair. They forget that Scott dyed his hair, had $15,000 in cash, and was in San Diego looking like he was gearing up to flee to Mexico. They forgot all of it. This kind of collective amnesia happens in these high-profile cases. Another example, the Menendez brothers. Decades later, people have forgotten just how much evidence there was against them. And now we've got organizations like the LA Innocence Project swooping in and grabbing headlines. Don't get me wrong, the original Innocence Project did some phenomenal work back in the day. When DNA technology became more accessible, they used it to clear people who were actually wrongfully convicted. That's what the system is supposed to do. But now groups like the LA Innocence Project are more about chasing the spotlight. They latch on to these big cases, cherry pick a few details, and suddenly, like the original trial, never even happened. And they love to throw around terms like circumstantial evidence as if that means the case was weak or unfair. There is this myth, thanks to TV shows and bad journalism, that circumstantial evidence is somehow less reliable than direct evidence. That's nonsense. Circumstantial evidence is in every domestic violence murder case. Here's the difference. Direct evidence is when someone says, I saw him do it. Circumstantial evidence is everything else. It's forensic evidence, timelines, behavior, common sense inferences, and guess what? It's just as valid. Scott Peterson's case, the circumstantial evidence wasn't just compelling, it was overwhelming. He bought a boat 2 weeks before Lacey disappeared and didn't tell anyone about it. He bought cement, which was consistent with how her body was weighed down. He told Amber Frey that Lacey was dead before her body was found. And then there's his behavior. He stopped cooperating with police, refused to communicate with Lacey's family, even called himself a widower while she was still missing. All that paints a very clear picture. But instead, people want to focus on a van down the street or a mattress. Now, the fight is all about testing this mattress. The defense claims it might have blood on it, but guess what? Initial tests were inconclusive. Later tests suggest it wasn't even blood, it could just be rust. And let's say they test it again and find unknown male DNA. So what? Unless they can connect that DNA to Lacey Peterson, it means nothing. But you know the LA Innocence Project will jump on it screaming, this is the real killer's DNA. This is the playbook they use. Find something irrelevant, blow it out of proportion, and hope people forget about the actual evidence. And the scary part is, sometimes that works. It does, and when it does, you end up with dangerous people back on the streets. Let's not forget who we're talking about here. Scott Peterson isn't just a liar, he's a cold-blooded killer. This man murdered his pregnant wife, dumped her body in the ocean like trash, and then had the audacity to show up at a vigil pretending to be the grieving husband. Meanwhile, he's on the phone with Amber Frey, spitting lies about being in Paris. If he gets out, he will be a danger to society, period. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment thing. Scott Peterson planned this. He was having an affair, he bought the boat and the cement, he was looking for a way out, financially, emotionally, everything. This wasn't just a murder, it was a complete rejection of his responsibilities as a husband and father. And the fact that he's still manipulating the system 20 years later just shows how dangerous he is. The takeaway is simple. The justice system worked. Scott Peterson got a fair trial, the evidence against him was overwhelming, and he was convicted. What we're seeing now is a desperate attempt to rewrite history. It's important to remember the facts and not get distracted by sensational headlines or fringe theories. At the end of the day, this case is about justice for Lacey Peterson and her unborn son. We owe it to them to keep our focus on the truth. And now on to our next topic. NXIVM founder Keith Raniere is guilty in a sex trafficking case involving Smallville's Allison Mack. Keith Raniere, the leader of the controversial New York-based self-help group, was found guilty Wednesday of federal sex trafficking and racketeering charges. He had pleaded not guilty on all 7 charges he faced. His conviction follows the April guilty plea by his top lieutenant in the group, former Smallville actress Allison Mack, in racketeering, conspiracy, and racketeering charges. Mack will be sentenced in September. Prosecutors described the group as a sexual pyramid scheme involving sex slaves with Raniere at the top. The group has long marketed itself as a group that empowers people and helps them manage emotional trauma. But prosecutors said it had a darker side built on coercion and manipulation. U.S. Attorney Richard Donahue said that Raniere, who portrayed himself as a savant and a genius, was in fact a massive manipulator, a con man, and the crime boss of a cult-like organization involved in sex trafficking, child porn, extortion, compelled abortions, branding, degradation, and humiliation. Investigators said Raniere, who was known as Vanguard to his followers, occupied the top of a pyramid called DOS with tiers of female slaves, each of whom could become a master to slaves beneath them. One former devotee described NXIVM as a cult, and the group has been the subject of scrutiny from both law enforcement and journalists after it came under fire from Dynasty actress Catherine Oxenberg, whose daughter India joined in 2011. India has since left that group. The criminal complaint against Raniere, obtained by People and other outlets, outlines how authorities believe the woman in DOS were forced to turn over collateral identified as potentially damaging personal information or materials such as nude photographs, with which they later could be blackmailed. Women victimized by Mack and Raniere believed their collateral would be released if they did not engage in sexual activity with the NXIVM leader. Authorities said Mack forced DOS slaves, including a woman identified as Jane Doe 1, to have sex with Rainier, and that Mack groomed DOS slaves for sex with Rainier by requiring them to adhere to extremely restrictive diets, and other requirements. According to arguments prosecutors made in court documents, Mack allegedly demanded that the group's slaves partake in readiness drills, requiring them to respond to their masters at any time of night. Mack's slaves were also allegedly kept seriously sleep-deprived and emaciated to the point where they stopped menstruating. Mack received financial benefits in the form of continued status and participation in DOS, as well as financial opportunities from Rainier, according to court documents. Prior to his trial, Rainier had sought to have the charges against him dismissed. In a motion, his attorneys described the group as a wonderful humanitarian organization that is dedicated to achieving peace on a global scale. Rainier's attorneys have not made a comment yet, and it's unclear if they plan to appeal the verdict. And with that, that is our first episode of Crime and Coffee for this week, or for this year. Give us a thumbs up if you like the video. Hit the subscribe button down below. And of course, let me know your thoughts on the stories we've covered. If there's something we should have included, let us know. Something we got wrong, let me know. And as always, stay safe out there. Of course, if you want to support the channel, you can buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/TCNS. As always, your support helps the channel grow. Great equipment, bringing you hosts, be able to pay them, and hopefully one day take this show on the road. As always, thank you so much for watching and listening. We'll see you next time.